The Threefold Study Strategy in Buddhism by Venerable Rungruan Papa Saro, Dr. Rungruan Lim Chu Patapa. In Buddhism, all problems in life are unwholesome, and the way to solve these problems is by understanding the difference between wholesome and unwholesome, then analyzing what is the root cause of the wholesome and unwholesome, so that we can have a right view on what really the nature is. Therefore, learning the truths of life within nature, the Dharma, is the most critical factor in life development. The Venerable Sariputta explained about what is the root of the unwholesome, what is the wholesome, what is the root of the wholesome, and the way to improve the quality of life as follows.
When, friends, a noble disciple understands the unwholesome and the root of the unwholesome, the wholesome and the root of the wholesome, in that way he is one of right view, whose view is straight, who has confirmed confidence in the Dharma and has arrived at this true Dharma. And what, friends, is the unwholesome? What is the root of the unwholesome? What is the wholesome? What is the root of the wholesome? The destruction of life is unwholesome. Taking what is not given is unwholesome. Sexual misconduct is unwholesome. False speech is unwholesome. Malicious speech is unwholesome. Harsh speech is unwholesome. Idle chatter is unwholesome. Covetousness is unwholesome. Ill will is unwholesome. Wrong view is unwholesome. This is called the unwholesome. And what is the root of the unwholesome? Greed is a root of the unwholesome. Hatred is a root of the unwholesome. Delusion is a root of the unwholesome. This is called the root of the unwholesome. And what is the wholesome? Abstention from destruction of life is wholesome. Abstention from taking what is not given is wholesome. Abstention from sexual misconduct is wholesome. Abstention from false speech is wholesome. Abstention from malicious speech is wholesome. Abstention from harsh speech is wholesome. Abstention from idle chatter is wholesome. Uncovetousness is wholesome. Non-ill will is wholesome. Right view is wholesome. This is called the wholesome. And what is the root of the wholesome? Non-greed is a root of the wholesome. Non-hatred is a root of the wholesome. Non-delusion is a root of the wholesome. This is called the root of the wholesome. When a noble disciple has thus understood the unwholesome and the root of the unwholesome, the wholesome and the root of the wholesome, he entirely abandons the underlying tendency to lust. He abolishes the underlying tendency to aversion. He extirpates the underlying tendency to the view and conceit, I am. And by abandoning ignorance and arousing true knowledge he here and now makes an end of suffering. In that way too a noble disciple is one of right view, whose view is straight, who has confirmed confidence in the Dharma and has arrived at this true Dharma.
The Buddha suggested that a way to have a right view, whose view is straight, who has confirmed confidence in the Dharma and has arrived at this true Dharma is by having a threefold study strategy to realize the truths of life within nature, the Dharma, as follows.
In Buddhism everyone has to study in the threefold of study, that is, the study on morality, the study on a mind, and the study on the wisdom in the threefold study strategy for mind development.
In Buddhism, the only way to resolve the problem in the mind is by having an insight study into a mind. Theoretically, although the problems inside the mind may start from the finest defilement first, then turning into a middle defilement before being aggravated to be a rough defilement, but in revealing an arising defilement within the mind, we have to apply a reverse tactic by studying the arising of rough defilement first, and after cleansing most of rough defilements by morality, by then the mind is clearer, then we can explore into the course of thought in the mind study by performing mindfulness meditation to uncover the hidden middle defilements. At this time, we will apply the mindfulness to abandon the middle defilement of the 5 hindrances, before reaching into the inner mind to the initial thought. Again, by having the mindfulness to liberate the thinking, the mind becomes very internally steady, united, and concentrated with purified mindfulness to perform an insight observation to gain wisdom of the truths of life within nature, and finally this wisdom will be used for the cessations of all finest defilements in the process of dependent origination. This solution approach to purify the mind is called the threefold study strategy, which can be described as follows. 1. The morality study. It is a studying about the norms of social rules and orders so that people in a community can live peacefully together. It is typically a set of common senses of what is right or wrong, what we should do and what we should not do any harm to others and public. It is sort of a social norm or public law that prohibits people to do anything harmful to others so that we can live together peacefully. During the Buddha time, he provided guidelines for people to follow, not only for general people, but also specific rules for the monk to discipline as a basis for Buddhist practice, because the one who has morality, then his mind will be calm, then the mind will not to be disturbed by troublesome thinking during the practice, and then the mind will get into the state of relaxation. Although most religions may teach about morality as rules of instructions from God, but the morality in Buddhism is about the set of social norms in living with other people, and when performing a practice with mindfulness, the benefits of morality will calm the mind in peace. The mindfulness with morality will be applicable in detecting the strong type of defilement is fully attained before the mind will instruct the body to take action to the world, and the mindfulness with morality will contain the rough defilement and hold the body not to take any wrong actions. In this case, as we let the mind usually process with an individual self-interest, but before taking any action, we have the mindfulness to verify and suppress the emotion for a while if it is moral or not. And this is the reason why the Buddha suggested having a study on the moralities. And consequently, a practitioner at this stage will gain kind of wisdom called the wisdom from listening, on morality, then knowing the truths about the world, nature, and the social norms of what is right, what is wrong, and by having a mindfulness to hold a rough defilement before bursting out into body expression and action to the world. And typically, in the study on morality, it is necessary to make a continuous improvement of the study, namely learning on the Buddha's words, suttas, practicing on the Buddhist practice, and then making assessment for progressive improvement. 2. The mind study. It is a systematic insight studying on the mind. Typically it starts when performing a Buddhist practice. In most of the religions, the teachings are preliminary based on morality, and then strengthening up with a belief in heaven as a reward for morality and faith in gods as supernatural entities. However, in Buddhism having a morality is considered as good, but it is still not sufficient to be a noble person because defilements are still generated from inside the mind. Therefore, in order to cease all suffers in life, one has to purify the mind, and in doing so one must investigate on where and how each type of the defilement is originated within the mind. As a result, learning about the knowledge on how to eliminate all the defilements based on an insight observation in the study on the mind by performing the 4 mindfulness foundations. Typically, in this study we start with having the mindfulness development, and then continuing on the mindfulness meditation, and once the mindfulness reaches up to the purified mindfulness to observe the mental phenomena of the mind, then we will start to sense the mindfulness on various states of the mind, as we collect on all the informative states, realizing that all of these mental phenomena are impermanent, deteriorating, and no self, respectively. As we proceed on the investigation in the 4 mindfulness foundation, we can observe the process that causes the changing state in the process of dependent origination, then we begin to gain the knowledge of what particular process will cause a specific state of mind, as well as realizing the benefit and harm of the arising state of mind, and then we will gain the knowledge of how to manage the mind processing correctly. The Buddhist practice is primarily a study about the mind by performing the practice of insight observation on mental phenomena arising within the mind. This study approach is an ancient cognitive process to gain wisdom for the use in responding to any receiving stimulus from the world. Although most religions may teach about practice, but the practice in Buddhism is not a miracle, but it is a cognitive process of introspective learning of the truths about the life based on facts. The practice of mindfulness meditation for hindrance cessation will be applied for detecting the middle type of defilement called the hindrance. Conceptually, moralities are sorts of social norms of what considered as right or wrong, but what is right or wrong should be defined from inside, and this is the reason why the Buddha suggested having a study on mind processing and learning on how to handle the arising hindrances. And consequently, a practitioner at this stage will gain kind of wisdom called the wisdom on mind by performing mindfulness meditation. It is the wisdom of knowing the truths about life and the interactions between lives and nature, so that practitioner will be able to terminate the hindrance of middle defilement within the mind by following the Buddha's suggestions. And typically, in the study on mind, it is necessary to make a continuous improvement of the study, namely learning on the Buddha's words, suttas, practicing on the Buddhist practice, and then making assessment for a progressive improvement. 3. And finally, the wisdom study. It is a study on what the problem is, and a way to learn on how to eliminate the arising defilement by applying the Four Noble Truths. Typically it starts when conducting a research on Dharma after performing an insight observation, including a systematic study by having observation, investigation, and analysis on the nature. It is purely a cognitive process of the mind from insight observations and learning about the truths of life within the nature through experiencing the reality of life so that we can have knowledge on how to respond back to the world rightly. In Buddhism, performing an insight observation will lead to seeing the truths of what's happening, but it requires a data analysis on the insight information to gain insight wisdom. Therefore, we need another step of wisdom study in the threefold study strategy to complete an introspective learning. The wisdom here is neither knowledge from reading and making an analytical thinking, nor a miracle gained from performing the meditation.